Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, and welcome to today's SFPE webinar on Digitalization, the Unbroken Chain of Information for Fire Safety. This is Louis Garazzi, SFPE's Director of Professional Development, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Before we get started, I'm going to go over some information in regard to the webinar logistics. First, all participants will receive a certificate of attendance for 1 PDH. To receive a certificate, you must stay online for the entire webinar. Certificates will be sent out via email within 1 week. Also, we do not provide copies of the speaker's PowerPoint presentation. However, we will be posting a video of this presentation on SFPE's YouTube channel and website within this week. Additionally, you can ask our speaker questions by writing it in the webinar dashboard. You may ask a question at any time. However, we will not be taking any questions until the end of the webinar. Today's speakers are Michael and Johan. Michael is the Public Affairs Manager of Briab and has a background as a fire safety regulator and researcher. For more than 10 years, he has led standard-setting work for fire safety in national and international regulations and standards. He's involved with the standardization of within CEN, ISO, Building Smart, as well as Nordic and Swedish committee. He is an expert on building requirements and has more than 10 years of experience working with the European fire safety industry and its regulatory bodies. Johan is owner, member of the board, and member of Briab's management team, is known in the industry as one of the leading fire engineering experts in Sweden. Johan started his professional journey at Briab in 2007 as a fire safety engineer. Since 2012, Johan took on the role as technical director. In 2015, Johan formed the Briab Research and Development business area with the objective to bring cutting-edge services and technology. In a slightly conservative field, Johan stands out as a true thought leader with a legacy of implementing a number of new legislations, processes, and best practices to the industry. So, with that being said, welcome, Michael and Johan.
Thanks, Louis.
Thank you, Louis.
So, thank you to SFPE for having us, and thank you all attendees for joining in on this really interesting subject. So we're doing this presentation based on a research project that we're doing right now in Scandinavia, the Unbroken Chain of Information for Fire Safety. And from my own perspective, I see, in essence, the digitalization journey as a joint sector that we need to do in the sector. And in my role, I work with other stakeholder groups, with regulators, clients, to facilitate that change. And in a bigger picture, I see that all countries have quite strict fire safety or fire protection regulations, but too often we miss the target. And I see that digitalization is a game changer and a big enabler. So how can we use it to create safer buildings?
Yeah, and from my point of view, this topic is very interesting, both from the fire protection engineering approach and possibility it gives us as an industry, but also from a business point of view to see how we can transform and do better and more sophisticated solutions and find new and better business opportunities over time.
Thanks, Johan.
Should you go?
Let's see. Something problem with there we go. So we have to face the fact that we're in the middle of the fourth industrial revolution. We see other industries being transformed by disruptive technology, and it's been stated by Bengt Flyberg, the professor in Oxford, at Oxford, that the engineering and construction industry is like many other industry, the disruptors may come from the outside, which would affect the current players. But we also know that we know that disruption occurs when industries are inefficient. So we might very well see a big transformation happen quite quickly, as we've seen in other industries. So we really need to be aware of that when we talk about digitalization. It's been discussed for a long time, but and we might see changes quite quickly coming in this decade.
Exactly, and we see the transformation coming within the building industry as a whole for the last 10 years, and we have seen the effect of it in some areas, but we also see the possibilities that it will bring to fire safety engineering over time. And from Briab's point of view, we saw this coming in 2016 from a more client-focused point of view, where our clients start to talk about a more digitalized workflow, a more model-based workflow, and a way to transform into that in a more sufficient way.
So to give you some context, we'll tell you a bit more about Briab and who we represent.
Yeah, Briab is a fire and risk safety engineering consultant firm who has been in business for the last 17 years, and been focusing a lot on fire protection engineering as the basis of our business. And we have seen a big transformation over the last decade when it comes to fire safety and fire safety aspects and things to work with. And we are today 140 employees in Sweden mainly, and have seen through this transformation within fire safety and safety aspects that we have been able to transform from a traditional fire safety service provider to look into also hardware and also software within the scope of safety. And one of these aspects we have been looking into is the Briab BIMfire Suite, which is a digital platform for fire safety as well. Michael, do you want to add something to Briab?
That's great.
Yeah.
Great summary. So what are the learning objectives of today? We'll give you the objective to relate how to fire protection engineer. The profession is affected by digitalization due to industry needs and the needs of regulators. We'll also give examples of how compliance of fire safety measures may be transformed in digital workflows, such as a BIM environment. And we'll be describing and discussing opportunities and challenges for the fire protection engineers. And I think this is a really interesting discussions where I really look forward to your questions in the Q&A, because we need to discuss these matters since we are in a state of transformation. And I think the coming decade is a bit uncertain. We know that there will be large changes for all parties, but we certainly need to discuss, look at the trends, see what's been happening in other industries, and learn from that. What will be the what forms of engineering will we be doing in 10 years? How will it be affected?
Exactly, and especially it is about the collaboration within the fire protection industry as a whole as well.
Definitely. So content-wise, we'll be talking about why digitalization changes fire safety based on our observations and our previous research. We'll be talking about fire safety in BIM, where we are today, the state in Scandinavia, and we'll be looking beyond, because it's important to realize that while BIM is an important enabler, it's just the start of something. We need to look at fire safety from a broader perspective to create true value in the whole value chain. And to show that we're already here, we'll show some proof of concept, some examples and situations where we see digitalization as a great tool. And And we'll be discussing, as we said, what's in this for the fire protection engineer, and what's in it from a business perspective. And I'd like to start with a flashback. Already 17 years ago, Michael Spearpoint, who I think a lot of you know already, he's with OFR in England, and is a research leader. He wrote a piece in the Fire Protection Engineering magazine in 2003, saying that at this stage it is important that the fire protection engineering community be aware of the developments in building product models to avoid being left behind. And if we look back, we have missed the train. We see that other disciplines such as architecture, structural MEP has been working in a BIM environment for quite a long time now, and fire safety has, while using some tools to a certain degree, we're not really in the same playing field as the other disciplines.
No, we're not working in a streamlined workflow with the others in the design team, but we see there might be a possibility to catch the train, as you see, said Michael.
Definitely. And to highlight this from the Scandinavian point of view, I'd like to start with an example. So this USB sticks is a symbol to me of where we are or were yesterday. I could also have shown a drawing with markups that we still see that we're still using today. But these USB sticks, they symbolize a situation where my colleague, she was visiting an 8-year-old hospital wing that was being refurbished. They were doing alterations due to the new needs of their operations. So she had to start looking into what was the latest drawings and information for the fire safety of that hospital wing, and she was handed from the client a bag of USB sticks, which took some time to find. And finally, when she went through this information on the USB sticks, it turned out that there was it was a mess of text-based reports, at best 2D drawings with prints and that were in some cases printed and markup, and some were enriched PDFs. But in the end, it was really hard getting a complete picture, and some of the information wasn't relevant, it wasn't inaccurate, and it wasn't even the latest information. So from the consultant's point of view, it was great. She had to spend a lot of extra time gathering all that information, but it was really frustrating to start with that instead of like just getting to the value creation part of the job. And we know that a lot of information is lost from the design phase into operation and facility management, and that's really frustrating, and it's just money down the drain. And a bigger perspective is if we look at the post Grenfell situation. One question that we asked ourselves after Grenfell is how many other buildings are at risk. So we knew that the facade construction was a fire risk, and we wanted to know where can we find these other risk facades. And if we look at other industries like the automotive industry, we would immediately face recalls of cars to fix the malfunctioning components and so on. Whereas in the construction industry, we don't have that kind of data. So post Grenfell, there was a tedious screening process where we had to send they had to send to inspect thousands of buildings, send samples of materials to testing labs, doing assessments to get to understand the scope of the problem and identify risk facades. And eventually 500 facades was identified that were of similar type, and then other types of facades were also deemed as risk facades, such as high pressure laminate facades. So it was a really big problem, and it's just a clear case of a situation where we are lacking the data and transparency regarding fire safety. And as we know, for fire safety, this is a matter of life or death in the end. And we see in post-accident situations that we can conclude that non-compliance is often a factor. It's contributing to the failures and the consequences that we see either in economical losses or in casualties. So securing the compliance and the information flows is essential from a safety perspective, and it's also important for the feedback mechanisms and the experience that we get from fires and from the design situations, what works in practice and so on. So what we need is secure information flows. We need transparency, which also gives us a ground for the audit trails, which is important for the accountability structures that we set up. So unless we secure those, it's hard to see a quality assurance system, a review system where we are accountable and reach our fire safety objectives in the end. Looking at our task of securing fire safety over the lifetime of the building, that's crucial. It's not sustainable to work too much in silos, where we end up with something being planned, which is not what's being built in practice. So without this proper information management, we are and will stay blind in some sense. And we've been looking in our research at this from a bigger perspective, at the global losses. So we know that there's about 500 billion euros, or almost $500 billion globally in losses due to construction errors. Fire safety is a part of that. Typically, a couple of percent of a building cost is related to fire safety, or even more for infrastructure. So fire safety has a fair share in the economic losses as well. And I think all who work in the construction process can agree on the time spent in frustration, not creating value, at least in certain projects where we are inefficient.
Exactly, and we have seen some numbers about the information losses, and it's defined as almost 40% of the time used in projects is about finding right information, find the right way of communication.
And in the big perspective, we're also seeing that we've had negative or really slow production growth in the construction industry, whereas other industries has improved much rapidly, where digitalization has been pointed out as a key factor. So we need to look at fire safety in a different way, where we're not stuck in the silos. We need to use digitalization to progress and prevent these information losses. And we see this from the client's point of view as well. It's being required more and more often due to client needs. It's costly not to work in a digital environment. And what's been proposed now in England is really interesting, where we see that England is in the forefront of proposing requirements connected to digitalization of fire safety. So following the Hackett report, the review of the English building regulatory system, there was two requirements that were connected to digitalization, where one was proposals to require deliveries in open BIM formats, so a BIM requirement for high risk buildings, and we see that these may be the first sharp BIM requirements, and it's from a safety perspective. And we also seen that there's a proposal for requirements to secure the golden thread of information, where basically key data for a building should follow the building over time, to ensure accountability, who has been responsible for what, what's the key fire safety information, and we should stress that this is not a unique challenge for England. We've done a comparison with Sweden, where we see that Sweden faces similar problems as England has with the same type of issues in the regulatory system, and with virtually very limited information requirements as well. So it's easy to see that that other countries may follow in this direction. Okay, so let's get into the technology, Johan.
Yeah, everybody today is talking about BIM and see it as different aspects of it. And just to make it clear in a good way, BIM could be like the 3D model that you could use and see and make it more visualized to understand building information. But from our point of view, we see it more as a working process to make it more efficient way of working together, to find a better way of have a process that includes different kind of professional within the AEC team. And it's also about have the right information from the early stages when you plan or when you do your design, move over to construction, and how you can manage and operate your building over time. And we see more and more design team members or stakeholders in our building projects are using BIM as a workflow and using the intelligent 3D model that is produced by it. And they have seen the value, but the greatest value or the best value comes when every part works in a more sufficient and streamlined way. But we have seen that fire safety hasn't been part of this workflow, haven't been part in the design flow, that even though the way in Scandinavia we are working with fire safety data, even if it is defined by fire protection engineering to define what kind of requirement to put on our building or our product. But we have been standing on their side, as Michael told you in the beginning of this webinar. We haven't been able to join and be a part of the overall working process. And we see a big difficulty that we haven't been integrated in a better way, because we are breaking the great workflow about it. So we have to change and work in a more efficient way.
One thing that we see is that regardless of the regulatory setting that we work in, or the design approach or that we use, we see that we have the same need of information management. So we have different regulatory systems with standards and codes, and we have, well, simplified, you can see two tracks. We either go the code consulting way, where we use deemed to certify solution and prescriptive codes to reach a certain fire safety design, or we could use the engineering approach or performance-based design. But in the end, we set a design and end up with product specifications, and the ways reaching these specifications may differ, but in the end we still have fire compartmentations, we have different types of fire protection systems, we have different types of fire ratings of the components in the system and so on. And these types of information is vital to ensure that they follow through into the construction phase and into operation and maintenance.
Yeah, exactly. And as you point out, the way of working in a more digitalized way or in a BIM workflow is in some way independent on how you work with fire safety. If it's more about code compliance, or if it's based upon analysis, based upon fire protection engineers engineering. It's about communicating the result to other design team members in a better way, so we could have our better focus on information.
And I'd say that it's, to us, BIM is more about the workflow than the technology itself.
Exactly.
It's looking at the workflow with new eyes, and looking at the flow of information and the relation between the different stakeholders in the process, and securing those information flows.
But to be able to use the right technology to work as a better engineer in the end.
Right. So we'll now be showing you an example.
Sure, some example from the Scandinavian. Due to the last years, we've been looking into how to integrate and work closer together, and we have looked into how could we take the first step to work in our BIM workflow, and how could we find the core issue of fire safety. And we were looking into this and started to help the fire safety industry to find the right tools to be able to work together. And one thing that we see in here in Scandinavia is that we usually work with different kind of CAD software, and one of the biggest one is Revit. So we've been looking into to have some kind of add-in tools for Revit to be able to work with the detailed specification of fire compartment levels. And we could show you one example of that, how it will look like. Just a very short.
So I'm showing here a project with a model.
Yeah, it's a residential building where we've been looking into how could we work with fire compartmentation and do some kind of optimization where we can take the workflow we have today when we do fire safety design in Scandinavia and transform it into our workflow that fits this kind of CAD software, so we can be able to communicate and work together with the other disciplines in the design team.
So what we saw here was the creation of the fire compartments on a detail level in the model, and which where we then may add the relevant fire safety properties, such as the fire ratings of the walls or the doors, for example.
Yeah. And it's also a way of building this kind of more technical driven 3D model. So you have your own fire model, so you can be able to integrate and communicate all critical fire safety information and data in a 3D visualized format.
And I think you're highlighting a really important thing here, Johan, that communication is what's a lot of what it's all about. We can communicate fire safety more efficiently.
Yeah, especially due to the complexity of fire safety. Itself, so to say. It's quite difficult for others to understand what we've been doing and working with at the time. Given this, that we have the information in a more digitalized format, it makes it possible to do a lot of optimization. For instance, doing evacuation drawings automated, so you have all the information you need to communicate it, print out your evacuation plans.
And by having the core information in the model as a one source of truth, it's really much more easy to create these life and safety plans.
And especially update it, because it's an iterative process over time as well.
It's also really easy to keep track of changes that the architects and other disciplines do. We may see these changes and incorporate them easily. Also about communication, getting that information from the architects is really valuable, like we see.
Yeah. And this is just one example how it could be used to integrate fire safety and the result of fire protection engineering into a more data-driven workflow. And but just to highlight how it will work in a more process-oriented way, we see that by starting working in a different way with the focus on data and fire safety data, it gives us a better understanding and a better way of doing our fire protection engineering and analysis over time. I will show you some example of that later on. But it also gives us the possibility to be more efficient in the communication of time, and also to push towards a more detailed design approach, where we know that we have the right information with us in, so we could be able to choose what kind of a product to work with to ensure that we have the right quality of the chosen products over time. And given this workflow, we have been using it for one of the biggest wooden office building in the world. It's called Magazine X, where we have been working with fire safety in a BIM environment and been able to have our own fire model with all the critical fire safety requirements. And that one has been like a baseline for the fire safety requirements that we've been working with. And it makes it more easy to communicate to the architect and ensure right compliance. And especially due to it's a wooden building, it has a lot of fire safety issues to take in a consideration.
Yeah, the details become really important, and something that we see is that the Swedish timber industry is really progressive here. It's to a large degree prefabricated with really high-level quality assurance processes, and they are quick to adopt digitalization. So they are really in the forefront here.
Yeah, and Magazine X is just in the start of their design process, so we will see how it will end up during design, detailed design of the building process. And when it comes to the fire protection engineering, we have been working with a BIM workflow when doing a lot of analysis over time. And from an asset point of view, by having a BIM-based product, it makes my work as a fire safety engineer much easier. Earlier, before we had this information on our 3D model to start working with, it took us about 40% of the time spent in our product just to create the right models, do my evacuation analysis simulations, or do my FDS simulations to be able to do the asset analysis. And the time spent for analysis was less than 25%. But in this project, we saw an increase of or change in focus, where we could focus more on the analysis and being engineers instead of building models or doing the documentation. And we changed the focus, so the fire safety analysis was about 50% instead of 25%. That gives a much better value in the end. And when it comes to the communication to the detailed design, we also see that it's much higher quality in the information given to different stakeholders, and it makes it more easy to find the right system and product that is in line with the fire safety requirement. And especially it's about joint review and crash control that ensures that we don't have any major clashes, so it could improve the quality and reduce cost over time. by working in this way, we found one clash, and by not handling this one in the detailed design stage, it would have cost about 1 million SEK instead of 25,000 SEK in additional consultancy. But as we've seen and talked about, we see that BIM is one important step to start working with it, and it's more about the workflow and the processes to integrate and be a better team player. But it's certainly a way forward. But the true value for fire safety is about transforming and having the information with us from initial design down the line to the actually built building. For fire safety adds value for the one who's going to live in the building, the prop owners and his clients, and it's for the end user. And for that cause, we see that we need something that is beyond BIM, and it's about transforming information in an unbroken chain. And it without proper information management, we will always be second in line. And we have this research project that Michael will give you some more insight about, but we've been looking into this.
We're a bit more than a half year into this research project called the Unbroken Chain of Information for Fire Safety, which is a Scandinavian project that we're doing in partnership with Briab, which is a big contractor and construction company in Sweden. We will be developing models for compliance and advancing and connecting these information flows in the product, and we'll be testing these new compliance models in actual construction products. We have also, since we see this as an important international area, we've also gathered an international group of regulators to join in the reference group to discuss this from a bigger global perspective. It's financed by a government-funded program called Smart Built Environment with the three parties: Vinnova, Swedish Energy Agency, and Formas. But also it's co-funded by us and Briab itself, the parties, and we'll be finishing in about a year. And we started with this picture, seeing if I go back to the USB stick, we see all this information being lost, and we know that up to 60% of the information is lost from design into the construction and the facility management. So this is a big problem. We see a lot of value going down the drain, and we certainly see that there's a big potential here that we want to address. And if we connect this to BIM and fire safety that we're already working with, we see that we need something new. We need to manage data in a new way to ensure this digital information flow, and we need that to be able to work with assurance and compliance in a more efficient way, compliance in a data-driven process. So transparency, accountability, and audit trails is what gives us ground for this high level of fire safety in practice.
Exactly. It is about taking all the good engineering work we do and try to communicate it and ensure that information will live over time. And it's about breaking the silo effect as we see fire safety have over time. And it's also about a business model change that has to come to be able to change the way we are working and be able to focus on value adding instead of selling hours. But we also see a lot of problems on the way that we have to handle. It's like legal aspects and who's taking responsible of what areas. But we also see that this is a great potential to highlight this responsibility that we take as fire safety experts. And within the concept, we also see the potential of doing some kind of design optimization with the right kind of information in the right format. And it make it more easy to do assurance within the design team or your design group, but also about compliance with the national regulations or the stakeholder requirements given to a product.
Yeah, we will definitely be seeing more of automation. I think once we go, since we're creating more data-driven processes, that's really opening up the door to that.
Exactly, and especially if the regulators start looking into a more machine-readable regulations as well, it will make it possible to work in a more efficient way.
And ideally, we would be here instead having a data information flow without losses or with minimal losses. Where we may maintain the fire information over time and keeping it available for the relevant parties. But we need to ensure that we don't get the information overflow either. Information has to be tailored for the respective parties.
Exactly, yeah. And that's really important to have a focus on, that we know that we have the right information for the right party or stake holder, so they know what to focus on and what are their fire safety information that they need to work with or fulfill during this compliance work that we're looking into.
But with the new tools, it may be really efficient to communicate to the relevant parties. So what will be the upside for the fire protection engineers in practice? We see that we get an earlier fire protection engineer involvement with the design team and so on. So we get fire safety is being addressed at an earlier stage, increasing the influence of fire safety, ensuring that it gets right from the beginning, which is in the end reducing the costs.
And especially being able to doing a better analysis in a more early stage that will add additional value.
And reducing the time for routine tasks gives us more time to do core engineering, where we're creating the bigger value. We'll having more ground for collaboration, and we'll have a sound information infrastructure, which is a huge potential opening up for many new different applications. We also see that this is improving quality as a whole. It's easier for the business itself to know that we have the right quality and so on. And in the end, it's about end client value.
Exactly, yeah, to meet the client's need and ensure that they get what they want to have in their products.
And for all stakeholders, this means in the end that they have less risks because we have bigger transparency in the process.
Yes.
Both from a product perspective and a business perspective. For the society.
Society as well, yeah.
So we're getting to the Q&A soon, but we'd like to wrap up with the risks and challenges.
Yeah, given the initial work that we've been doing, both in actual projects, but also from a research point of view, we have seen the potential and we have seen that it works in practice, but we have also realized that there are some risks and challenges within the building industry, but also within fire safety industry itself. And it's one of those is about legal aspects. Who's taking responsible over what? How could we ensure that in a good, sophisticated way? We also see the traditional business model is due to that we want to make things more efficient. We have a transformation of the traditional business model to work with. We also see new competence requirements within the company, knowledge that we haven't had before, that we have to recruit and get on board to the fire safety work. And also the acceptance of change within a company, but also within the industry itself.
Right. And final slide before we go to the questions and the discussions that I really much look forward to. We see that that digitalization is really transforming other industries. The construction industry is also rapidly changing, and it's certainly not going to be leaving the fire safety industry alone. We're also affected by this, and we should grab this chance. It's enabling us to become better engineers. And while Johan lifted the need for new competence as a risk, I'd also like to lift this as an opportunity. I think to attract a young engineer crowd, I think we need to be changing the way we work and adopt digitalization to attract new the modern workforce.
Yeah, we need.
And there's definitely business opportunities. We've seen that.
Yeah, within the company, yeah.
And in the end, working with digitalization means that we can communicate with stakeholders and work with them, essentially giving us the tools to co-create a fire-safe world, which in the end it's what fire protection engineering is about. All right, so thank you. We'd like to give the word to Lewis.
Yeah.
We're looking forward to hear your questions.
Thanks, Michael and Johan. Yeah, we do have some time for some questions. We do have some of them coming in now, so let's get started. So one of the questions coming in is, could you please provide some specific examples to what type of information is going missing from the design phase to the construction phase and some of the issues around that?
Well, some information losses that we have seen is, for instance, when you go from your design phase over to construction phase, that we haven't been able to ensure that you have the right fire safety requirements on the doors, on the windows, or you have in some cases also seen that the evacuation concept isn't right, that they have to add additional measures on the construction site afterwards when they're starting to build.
And to fill in, as we saw in England, a lot of property owners had no idea of what type of materials were in their facade systems in their existing buildings. And we know from a similar experience in Sweden when we tried to track down what types of facade systems were in Swedish buildings, if there were similar risk facades. It was very hard to find that information. The construction documentation was insufficient, so the as-built information wasn't clear enough and not stored with the authorities. So it was really hard to find that type of information.
Okay, great. The next question we have is, given the potential unreliability of building owners who routinely change over the life of a building, do you see municipalities becoming the repository for building information in the future?
In Sweden, we see this trend of changing, that the municipality will put requirements on our more BIM-based workflow to be able to ensure that when you renovating your building, that you have the right information within. But I think it's going to take time for the municipality to transform and be able to define the right requirements. What do you say, Michael?
I agree. I think it's a challenge that we have. We're still lacking data standards in some areas. Certainly for fire safety, there needs to be new standards developed. And I think that authorities may at least, and already today in some countries, require certain aspects of fire safety to be stored at the authorities' repositories. But the main responsibility lies with the property owners, even if those owners are shifting over time. They are responsible for the full information, and maybe an extract is given to the authorities. But however, that may change over time.
But we have seen change the last 2 years here in Scandinavia, that the building owners start to require that their new products should be BIM-based, and they define what kind of information they want to have to be able to do good data-driven facility management.
One thing that we see as well that I'd like to add is that we see that the digitalization and data is more stored now in cloud-based fashions, and in other areas such as the construction products industry, it's possible to supply information about your products on the web or in web interfaces or in the cloud, and that could be possible as well for building data, that you supply the data in a cloud-based way where it may be accessed by authorities, but it's not stored by the authorities.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great. Next question we have is, do you also consider structural fire resistance aspects in this tool with fire and in BIM? With that, would this be suitable for prescriptive approaches as well as performance-based?
Yes, we see that the way of working with fire safety requirements, fire safety data in a BIM workflow, and with the Scandinavian example that I shown, you have the possibility to add requirements for structural design as well, and the fire safety aspects of that. What was the second part of the question?
Do you see this tool being used for prescriptive approaches as well as performance-based?
Yes, we do. Due to that, you could use your performance-based design or your fire safety engineering approaches, and the results from your analysis will be a part of the requirements given to the product. So it could be used both when you're doing performance-based design or you're doing a more prescriptive design solution.
Great. Next question we have is, what process would you suggest when dealing with renovations where material testing would be required to determine what materials are in use?
So I assume that if in this example, you would have an existing building and you would have insufficient data on the fire protection of that building. And in that case, I mean, that's we have to face it, that the biggest challenge we have is the existing building stock. Yeah. It's easy to work in a model-based workflow with a new building, where we start from basically from scratch, and we have control, best possible control of the data. But there's other ways to manage the data of buildings, the existing buildings.
Yeah, but still, you need to create a digital twin of that building to be able to have this unbroken chain of information. Or to be able to do that, you need to go out and do audit control and make a
scan of the building. So I guess you would scan with maybe using drones or cameras, exactly. And do a point cloud, and then use experts to add the fire safety measures that they know. And in this case, if there's materials that you don't know, for example, in the facade, then you could do measures such as drilling cores or using cameras to go behind the facade and see what type of material is behind, and eventually send it to fire testing. Mm. And the results of that fire testing would be added as fire safety properties or characteristics of the materials, which could be added to the digital twin of the model, just like you would do for a new building in a BIM environment.
Yeah. And that's the way they did it in UK, when they try to understand how big is the problem due to the Grenfell fire.
Great. So the next question we have is, as we continue to move towards performance-based design, it becomes harder and harder for fire officers and fire service to generalize information about buildings. So the question would be to you both, has there been any consideration or thoughts or outreach to this key stakeholder in providing user-friendly data to help enhance their ability to quickly and efficiently respond to emergencies?
So I see the fire and rescue services, the fire brigade, as a very important stakeholder, and having data data for the fire safety in a digital way is really there's a huge potential to communicate with the fire brigade. You could give live the latest accurate data to the fire brigade for the on scene, giving them much better ways to do their planning on a site. And we have examples as well with like for cultural heritage buildings and buildings with certain protection, where we've seen big failures, like in museums where you have a specific art, where it's really hard to have that type of information on site. So having that would be really helping the fire brigade's job. But I see that we need to start getting the fire brigade engaged in the development of BIM and fire safety, and involving them in the standards creation processes as well, and understanding their needs. And that's something where I see that we need to do more.
Exactly, yeah. And also from a technical point of view, making the information more accessible, so you don't have to have expensive software to see a 3D model or have the right knowledge to open it and work with it. But you have to have a more technical platform that make it more accessible for the one who only wants to visualize and see the information.
Yeah, that's key here. Having information stored in a way which is sort of independent of
the software, yes.
And where you may tailor the information for the relevant stakeholder group.
That's a very, very important aspect of the transformation. Not be stuck in one digital format or one digital software. It has to be open.
And we probably need to define for the different stakeholder groups. We probably need to define standards or standardized information requirements for the respective groups. What do the fire brigades need? What does the building control officers need, and so on, to be able to address those needs.
Great. So the next question we have is, have you had any experience with blockchain processes to assure unmodified transfer of BIM-related fire safety data? And if you have, if you could just discuss that a little bit.
No, we haven't run into that problem yet, but I think it might come in the future, and then it's really important to highlight and see how to work with it.
Yeah, I think the key here is that we see these new technologies such as blockchain technology, or using artificial intelligence or generative design and so on. I mean, these are all really powerful technologies that I think we will see. But I think the key here is that we haven't really digitalized our fire safety information yet, and that's where we need to start.
And especially the most important thing is the work process. Its focus is on how we do things. That's the most important at this stage.
Right.
Great. And I think this will be the last question we have for today. But do you guys see any future issues with proprietary BIM models drafted today where this scenario happens that it won't be compliant with future software as technology advances pretty rapidly, and the fact that written documents, while onerous, are more quote unquote future proof.
Yeah, I think it may be a problem, and that we need, and that's why we need open BIM standards, and we need to engage in communities like the building smart communities to define standards such as IFC standards and so on. I think that's one area where regulators may need to do more, and also the industry. We need to define contractual agreements and information requirements from authorities and so on to ensure that we have standards that are future-proof and so on.
All right. Well, that wraps it up. I want to thank everyone who participated in today's webinar, and thanks again to Michael and Johan for an outstanding presentation.
Thank you, Lewis.
Thank you, Lewis.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks, everybody. All right.